DNC Chair Tom Perez recently endorsed New York Governor Andrew Cuomo in his Democratic primary against progressive Cynthia Nixon. So Nixon is backed by progressive groups like Our Revolution, and Andrew Cuomo is backed by the Democratic establishment. Now, because Tom Perez is the DNC chair, he is supposed to remain neutral in these Democratic Party primaries. But in this case, he clearly wasn't. So the Washington Post recently interviewed Bernie Sanders and asked him what he thought about this.
New York, your home state, you were born in Brooklyn.
Yes.
The chairman of the DNC, Tom Perez, endorsed Andrew Cuomo, who's locked in a pretty competitive primary with Cynthia Nixon. Our Revolution has endorsed Cynthia Nixon. Do you think that was a mistake for the chair of the DNC?
Absolutely.
And does it make it harder to trust that progressive candidates in 2020 will get a fair shake when they're wading into primaries like this?
It does. Look, let us also be clear. Maybe I'm the only person here who will tell you this, but you got Democrats up here who will tell you, oh, Democratic Party is God's gift to the human race. Republicans will tell you the same thing. Look, there is massive discontent with the political system. People don't vote. People often hold their noses and they vote. And I think, by and large, especially in the Democratic Party, what I have said, as you indicated, I am an independent who has caucused with the Democrats, for my whole political life here in Washington, is open the doors of the Democratic Party. Welcome working people, welcome young people in, welcome idealism in. So when you have the head of the DNC, and I've worked okay with Perez on some areas, and I'll mention that in a moment, but to endorse one candidate over the other is not what the chair of the DNC should be doing.
Now, Bernie Sanders is obviously completely right. Tom Perez, because of his position, he shouldn't be endorsing anybody in these primaries. Now, that said, it's obvious that Tom Perez is an arm of the Democratic Party establishment. So even if he didn't endorse Andrew Cuomo, we would all know who he's supporting in that race. And even still, so there's sort of a few layers to this. So yes, I completely agree with Bernie that Perez should not have endorsed Cuomo. That said, who the hell is voting based on who Tom Perez supports? I mean, really, is anybody out there thinking, oh, well, I was going to vote for progressive Cynthia Nixon, but DNC Chair Tom Perez endorsed Andrew Cuomo, so I'm switching my vote to Cuomo. Nobody's doing that. So really, this has no effect on anything. All it does is show us that the Democratic Party is still in bed with these establishment candidates. Now, what Bernie said there about welcoming people into the party is just exactly right. So again, these sorts of moves like what Tom Perez did here is sending a message out to progressives who may not feel good about the Democratic Party that, yeah, you still aren't welcome, at least in terms of who the Democratic Party establishment is supporting. But that doesn't mean that progressives can't take over the party. So the best way to get back at Tom Perez and the DNC here is if you're in New York, make sure you go out and vote for Cynthia Nixon. Imagine the insanity if Cynthia Nixon defeats Andrew Cuomo, despite the fact that people like Tom Perez and the Democratic Party establishment like Hillary Clinton have endorsed Andrew Cuomo. So if Cynthia Nixon beats Cuomo, it'll be huge. Now, to be fair to Tom Perez, let me play the end of that clip there where Bernie Sanders talks about how him and Perez have worked together.
Now, one of the areas that we have worked on, we will see what happens, man, and this will be a very big deal. Right now, as you know, when I ran, you had many super delegates, almost all of whom ended up supporting Hillary Clinton. And I think there is a widespread understanding that's just not right. And in fact, you had super delegates voting for Clinton in states that I won pretty handsomely. Right. And I think there is a general feeling that that does not make a lot of sense. And now there is agreement among Tom Perez and a lot of the Clinton people, as well as our people, who came together and what Clinton and I formed what we called a Democratic Unity Reform Committee, to say that we should substantially reduce the number of superdelegates, actually by about 70%. Some people think we should eliminate them all, and I could certainly support that. Will that happen? Well, we will see. Pay attention to that. Right. And then you got other issues. In New York State, we talk about voter suppression, one of the great problems of our country. It's not just money in politics. You got Republican governors and attorneys general all over this country trying to make it harder for for poor people or people of color to vote. How outrageous is that? Go to New York State and find out that if you're going to participate in the Democratic primary, you have got to be registered as a Democrat 6 months before that primary. And when I ran in 2016, 3 million people in New York State were ineligible to vote. Does that make any sense? No. So those are the kinds of hurdles and obstacles that I think Democratic leadership has got to transform, change.
So Bernie Sanders is exactly right. Superdelegates is clearly an undemocratic system. So you still have, he's being more than fair to Tom Perez and the Democratic Party here. The Democratic establishment is still trying to hold on to superdelegates. Now, sure, maybe they've tried to reduce them by 70%, but why do they exist? To have a few people in every state have more power than the average voter in determining who becomes the Democratic Party nominee is undemocratic. So you have one side, the progressives, who are correct on this issue. They want to get rid of all superdelegates. And then you have the Democratic Party establishment who simply want to hold on to their power. So they're holding on to superdelegates for dear life so that they can still have more influence on Democratic Party elections than the average voter. Now, that makes no sense. So, the one example he brought up there, he didn't say it specifically, but Minnesota. In Minnesota, you had Al Franken, a senator, a superdelegate, put his superdelegate vote behind Hillary Clinton when Bernie Sanders won that state. So despite Bernie Sanders having an overwhelming win in Minnesota, Al Franken had more power as a superdelegate to override that and say that, no, forget what my voters say in Minnesota. I'm putting my support behind Hillary Clinton because I think I know better. Again, this is an undemocratic system. So you simply can't defend it. Now, the areas where progressives and moderate voters can work together on is pushing back against voter suppression. So everything Bernie Sanders said about that is exactly right. Voter suppression affects everyone. Everybody should be able to go out and vote. Everybody should be registered to vote at 18. I don't know why that's not a thing. So I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you're a moderate. I don't care if you're a progressive. You should be able to vote if you want to get out and vote. So any hurdles to that should everybody, whether you're left, right, center, you should be working to eliminate those hurdles so that everybody has the ability to vote. So that's where voters and the establishment can work together to change. Though, the Republican Party has reasons why they are trying to suppress the vote, because when the vote is low, they have a better shot at winning. So it's unlikely that Republicans are going to try and remove those hurdles, but the Democratic Party establishment and progressive voters should be able to work together to try and eliminate those issues. So there are a few areas where the Democratic Party or the establishment can work together on progressives with, but ultimately, progressives have to continue battling the Democratic Party and especially the leaders within the party, because they're still holding on to things like superdelegates and endorsing people like Andrew Cuomo when they should be remaining neutral in these primaries. So just keep in mind that, there is movement on these issues, but until you vote out the leaders within the Democratic Party establishment, it's going to continue to be a battle. Hey, if you like this video, hit that subscribe button below and consider throwing me a few bucks on Patreon at patreon.com/therationalnational or therationalnational.com/join.